Yeah. Who's responding?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Water Committee meeting of March the 15th, and it's wonderful to see so many faces in the room. I think we have everybody here today, as well as staff. So I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of Comox First Nation, and as always, we thank them for sharing their territory with us. And the first item on the agenda is the management report. If I could have a motion. We've got Arbor and Grant for receipt. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, thank you. Well, that's carried. We'll move on. The Comox Valley Water Management Advisory Committee minutes. We've got Hamilton and McCollum. And any questions or comments about those minutes? Seeing none, is anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing no one, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, now we have the next item is the Water Master Plan, and we do have staff to do a presentation. Could I have someone to move receipt of? We've got Grant and Cole Hamilton, and I'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Chris LaRose will provide the presentation and answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Russell, and through the chair, good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, as the chair mentioned, I do have a presentation to help walk through this the staff report. So the report is recommending a scope of work for use in a competitive procurement process to help secure an engineering consultant to help guide the Comox Valley water system through a water master planning process over the next 15 to 18 months. So the planning process, the water master plan, is intended to complement the asset management work that's already been done for this service. So asset management tells us when our infrastructure will need to be replaced based on its age and condition, whereas the water master plan will tell us the size that infrastructure needs to be replaced to, when it's replaced, and potentially in some cases when it might need to be replaced prior to condition or age driving its replacement due to growth in specific areas. So first of all, the goals, and this relates to the first appendix to the staff report. So the goals of the process, first of all, are to develop accurate projected water demand. That's a key starting point, obviously, when we're talking about capacity of our infrastructure. Second of all is understanding and doing the work necessary to fully understand our system and how options for meeting the future demand that those projections deliver. Third, determine how conservation initiatives can play a role in potentially delaying capital investments. So we've seen significant improvements in per capita consumption in the service, and we want to further explore if those trends continue and per capita consumption continues to decline, where might we be able to defer significant capital investment? Fourth is assessing the need for better separation between regional conveyance or transmission systems and the municipal distribution network. So this is intended to address a need or kind of a topic of discussion that's been with us for the past several years, as we've come to realize that there are areas within the regional water system where the ownership and responsibility are quite gray. So that's one issue related to this one. And then second of all, the likely need for better separation, so physical separation. So right now we have extensive sections of the regional transmission system which are feeding, with small feeds, the municipal distribution system. And then we also have sections of municipal distribution system, which are kind of being used to convey regional water. So we think, through discussions at advisory that's a problem. We want to define that problem and assess options, identify and assess options for creating that better separation. And then finally, the plan should help us to deliver a very clear vision for the future of this water system. There we go, tasks. So next, the key tasks that are going to help us achieve those goals. So obviously project management throughout. So we'll have internal project management as well as the engineering consulting team. We plan to start with building a fact base. So this will involve a close collaboration within the CVRD, but also between us and the municipalities to make sure that we're aware of all of the recent planning documents that will be relevant to this planning process. We'll be estimating the future demand, modeling our existing system, and then modeling the future system in terms of potentially in the context of scenarios, growth scenarios, then developing a capital improvement plan or an asset replacement plan, again, driven by capacity rather than condition and age, which is covered off under the asset management work. Potentially proposing and assessing different water conservation initiatives, developing options, like I said, for better separation between the regional and municipal systems, brainstorming and delivering options for kind of concept visions for the future water system, and then finally summarizing all of this in a report and presentation. And finally, just a high-level timeline. So we brought these the attached scoping documents through the advisory in early February. Took away that feedback, adjusted the approach, brought it back to advisory on March 1st for the second look with municipal staff, and then we're here today on March 15th. If all goes well, we'll be issuing a request for proposals in April, late April, early May. Awarding the contract in early summer, working in collaboration with the municipalities over the summer to build a fact base, and then working in collaboration with municipalities and the Comox First Nation staff through summer and fall and into winter, working towards that final date of a report in March of 23. And along the way, we'll be providing regular updates to the Water Committee and looking for your valuable feedback. So we're very conscious of the myriad demands on municipal staff, and we'll be working hard to balance kind of our need for information and buy into the finished product without generating an onerous level of work for municipal staff. So we'll be making full use of the advisory meetings where possible, and only where necessary, scheduling dedicated meetings to walk through issues with municipal staff. Just finally, overall, we're really set on creating a final outcome that is useful, that will help guide the system for many years to come. And to this end, some of the key outputs will be working documents like spreadsheets that will be used on a daily or at least weekly basis, and maintained over time to ensure that planning work stays constant and doesn't end up just as another plan on the shelf. So that's our intent. So that's it for me, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. So we'll open up. We have Director Arber.
Yeah, thanks. That's I think it's the most steps in the process that I've seen of any of our initiatives the last few years. Is like 12 or 15 different that slide that has everything. One thing that was that I'll be interested in was there was a comment in the staff report about looking at the potential impact of conservation on infrastructure replacements and such.
Yeah.
So it's probably early to talk about that, but I think, for the board, that will be really interesting information to receive. I don't know if it's going to be like a marginal difference or if it's going to show that conservation can really save us money in the long term. So I'm sure you don't have anything to comment on right now, but I'm just glad to see it in the project scope that's can be looked at.
Great, thank you. And we'll move over to Director Hamir.
Thanks for the report, Chris. Question about development, new development in the electoral areas. We had a pretty robust conversation yesterday at electoral areas regarding a potential new development, which kind of hinged on, having water supplied. So I'm wondering if staff could comment on, projects that are kind of in the process, how or if they will feed into this water master plan. Are we under the assumption that that kind of demand will be captured, or are we building it just if you can comment on what staff are thinking?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So we've actually just in the process of nearing the completion stages of two smaller water master plans for our system in the north, water system in the north, so Black Creek, Oyster Bay, and then in the south for Union Bay. So we've gone through a similar process, maybe not quite as extensive, but so a key part of developing those projections is understanding what's underway now, what's in the near term, midterm, and long term in terms of development. The farther out we go, we look more at the official community plans and so not just what the zoning is now and what it can support in terms of density, but what's been approved as part of the community vision. So yes, we have a very rigorous process to tease that out. It'll be different and more complicated for this project, obviously, given the different jurisdictions. But we're committed to working closely with our own planning staff to understand what's planned and what's possible within the surrounding rural areas, as well as with the municipal staff to do the same for the municipalities.
Great, thank you. And Director Arbor.
Yeah, that question triggered another one for me from Dr. Amir, which is, what I find interesting sometimes is I'm not sure that we've calculated the build out under all of our collective OCPs. That if you had it like fully filled, I don't have a number for that, what that would likely represent in terms of population, but it seems like from a planning perspective, it'd be an interesting figure to have, because we're still a growing region, North America as a region. You look at a lot of places, Europe or Asia is actually in growth, Africa, but places that seem a lot of regions that have found their population number and tend to stick around there. Where you're not seeing growth. If you go in a lot of European countries, they've kind of given up on growth. They're just so I'm actually wondering the usefulness of that, of thinking of under our current OCP and zoning bylaws, if everything got filled and every suite got filled and everything, what does that look like in population, and what does that look like for our water system? So I just put that out there. I'm not sure we've completed that work either at planning or elsewhere.
No, I can speak to that a little bit. I think, I think the short answer is that's likely well beyond the lifetime of our infrastructure. So I think that's the kind of the assumption that's inherent, because we've done over the past handful of years, we've done through the liquid waste management planning process, through the site master planning process for our treatment plant. So other water and sewer processes, we usually start with demand projections, right? So we work closely with the municipalities and our own planning staff to project population growth, to the end of the useful life of the infrastructure that we're building. So I know, at no point have we bumped up against a maximum during those analysis. So does that mean, that I think our assumption is that means it's beyond the end of that lifespan, that continuing at a currently kind of projected rate of growth, we don't get near to that build out rate within the life of our infrastructure. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I wanted to ask a question just before we go to Director Grieve on that topic, and I noticed that we're using the census numbers from 2016 were mentioned. And I know when Courtney was starting their OCP process, they actually underestimated the growth. When the census numbers came in, it was actually surpassed what they had projected. And I know it's a really difficult thing to do, but I just wondered, if you could speak to that at all.
Sure,
Thanks.
yeah, thanks. We actually just flagged that yesterday and reached out to municipal staff just to check back in, because now that the updated census results are back, we want to understand. So it's a little early days, but we flagged it. We'll be working with the municipalities. I think it'll likely take them a little bit of time to assess or analyze those numbers. But yeah, we definitely have flagged that, and we want to be working with the most up-to-date data for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's timely that some of the municipalities are doing some of this work that can hopefully help out. Okay, Director Grieve.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Yeah, building on this discussion, not to belabor it, but when you talk about water conservation, back 10 years ago, when we talked about water conservation, we had a big pushback from communities saying, well, we live in a rainforest, we have unlimited water. And we're looking at a 50-year horizon. So I'm hoping that we have a real clear-eyed view of what's coming down the pipe, because you have to remember, you fly over California and Nevada nowadays, and you look at all these little mud puddles that used to be lakes. And, we take a lot for granted as our lake this year looks pretty down there for this time of year. And unless we get a whole bunch of runoff, we're going to be facing diminished rainfall, at least that we can retain or keep for this. And South America now is experiencing a lot of problem with their hydroelectric power. So we're making a lot of assumptions on hydroelectricity to power everything, and having all this water, for agriculture and human consumption and fish presence and all the rest of it. So I just hope that, we gaze into our crystal ball a little clearer than we have in the past, because I got a feeling that it's not going to be quite what we expect. Talking about a 50-year time horizon here is a pretty big task. So yeah, I think water conservation is becoming increasingly more important as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Grieve.
Can I just speak
Yes,
to that
go
just
ahead.
very briefly? It's an excellent point, and I was remiss in not highlighting that there's two big reasons for considering further emphasis on water conservation. Deferring capital costs is definitely one, but we have limited license capacity. As you've just pointed out, limited and uncertain future for our water supply, but certainly a ceiling on our existing water license obtained through the delivery of the water treatment project. So that 50-year planning horizon for this water master plan, very likely, at today's per capita consumption, pushes us beyond that license capacity. And it's not a strong assumption that additional license capacity will be there when we need it, if we need it in 20 to 30 years. So absolutely another very strong argument for working to reduce our per capita consumption.
Great. Yeah, it's an interesting problem to have as well, in terms of, trying to conserve water, but then that takes away money for projects. So it's, yeah, it's a tricky one. Do we have anyone else with any comments or questions? Seeing none, I guess we'll vote on this. So all in favor? Anyone opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So we've got that, the recommendation. Is there any discussion on the recommendation? This is to go ahead with the planning process. Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you. Okay, the next item is also staff presentation on the updated risk assessment for the Comox Lake Watershed. Thank you, Grant and Grieve, and I'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you. And once again, Chris LaRose will provide this report and answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Russell, and through the chair. So yeah, prepared a brief presentation to help guide us through the report on your agenda. So just starting with a bit of background. So the watershed protection plan was completed in 2016 and received by the water committee at that time. It was that process of developing the plan was guided by the watershed advisory group. So that was a committee composed of all key stakeholders. We had a very strong participation by watershed stakeholders in that group, and in fact that participation has largely continued to this day. So that group has transitioned from developing the watershed protection plan to helping to implement it. So we're really lucky to have that level of engagement. Some of the individuals have changed, but the organizations are largely still all represented. So the intention at that time was, as the plan was received, is that document would be a living document with some type of revision every 5 to 10 years or as necessary. So this risk assessment is, could be considered a kind of a minor update to the plan, a more fulsome update where the language and general approach of the plan will be reviewed and adjusted. Will come at some point in the not too distant future. So the driver for this updated risk assessment. So first of all, the risk assessment is the kind of the core of the WPP. It was actually done a number of years prior in response to a provincial health order, that the service undertake a risk assessment to ensure that we had our that we were looking at and open to risk to the watershed. And so that risk assessment was completed around 2006, and then it formed the core of the WPP process 5 to 8 years later. And so this is an update to that risk assessment, and it's being driven by some change in circumstances. So largely due to the new infrastructure. So that new lake intake. So the intake off of the Puntledge River was very different from where our intake is now. There were risks inherent to a river intake that have been mitigated by the shift into the lake. Also the new treatment plant. So specifically the addition of the ultraviolet and filtration. Updated climate information. So through the water treatment project permitting process, we undertook an extensive body of work, including updated climate modeling for the service. So that's been incorporated. We undertook septic system upgrades as part of the acquisition of the Cold Beach property. So one of the conditions of that sale was that the CBRD would retain a holdback to be released, $25,000 to be released for every Comox Lake Land Corp cabin that upgraded its septic system. So that addressed one of the key risks to the lake, and some other new information. There you go. So at a high level, so in addition to kind of reassessing some of or all of the relevant risks, we also took a couple little structural changes. So the first one being that risk number 11, so body contact recreation, in other words, swimming, it's been made into a single risk. So they were previously separate risks associated with two different threats from body contact, being bacteria versus other pathogens like parasites and viruses. So that's no longer deemed necessary given the addition of ultraviolet and filtration. So they are from swimming. Risk number 12 was split into two risks, and those are separately assessing the risks from managed trails versus unmanaged trails. We've done quite a bit. There's been an extensive amount of work done since 2016 on mitigating the risks from trails. For example, the UROC agreement with Mosaic for managing the trails in that area. They've done an extensive amount of work. We've also worked in the Forbidden Plateau to a lesser extent, but still thought it was necessary to help us track the relative progress on these two, splitting them into two, A and B. And then finally, we've identified a new risk. It hasn't been assessed, but it's been flagged so that it's there for consideration now, and then when we open this up again, an opportunity to quantify it. And that one is relating to development in the watershed. That was not originally in the watershed protection plan because the plan recommended no new development in the watershed. But the reality is that with the industrial development on Bevan Road and potentially rezoning of the Comox Lake Land Court property, there is arguably there's the high potential for development within the watershed. So that should be tracked, hence the addition of a new risk. This is, I realize now it's not very easy to see, but this is just to give a sense of the kind of the risk matrix that is used to determine, to convert the point score to a category of low, moderate, high, or very high. So risk, just as a very brief refresher, is a combination of likelihood and consequence. And so each one of those gets a numerical score, and then the two are multiplied to provide a numerical score. So that for that top graph, and then that numerical score is referenced against a kind of a legend to determine, whether it's a score of an 8 is a moderate rather than a low, and so on. So that's the concept behind how our risks are assessed and then communicated. So there are, out of the 30 risks, 30 now with the addition of that commercial, industrial, and residential development. So that's the new one at the bottom. So not currently quantified as it's a new risk. Of the 29 pre-existing ones, I believe we have 8 that have shown a change. So some of those have increased, as you can see, the top 2. So wildfire and flooding have both increased, and that's as a result of kind of incorporation of the much more detailed local climate change modeling for the watershed. Whereas number 10, so the third line down, sewage management facilities, decreased likelihood to moderate from a high, and that's largely as a result of the improvements to the septic systems at the Comox Lake Land Court property. Number 11, so that's the body contact recreation. So this is decreased fairly significantly from a score of 16 to 4. So from high to moderate. And that's a reflection again of the enhanced treatment at the treatment plant. So addition of ultraviolet and filtration in addition to the pre-existing chlorination. 12A, so this is the trails and non-motorized trail use. So this is the one again that we split into 12A and a 12B to help track the differences between managed and unmanaged trails. So those ones have gone, 4A, which is the managed trail, has gone from high to moderate as a result of that extensive work done by stakeholders within the watershed. 14 is wildlife contamination. So this one has gone from high to moderate again due to the enhanced treatment and multi-barrier approach through our new water treatment plant. 15, so lakeshore cabins, camping and designated campsites, etc. Slightly still a moderate risk, but a step down again because of the enhanced treatment. And then the road network again. So that's impacts from traffic and sediment loading from forestry roads. So again, a decrease due to the improved treatment through the treatment plant. So that's what I had for the presentation. So just maybe a brief note that the revision of the risk assessment was flagged as a key input to the coal beach management planning process. So definitely look to hear more about this the revised risk ratings when we talk about that process.
Great, thank you, Chris. Do we have any questions or discussion? Councillor McCollum. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Arbor.
You can go ahead. I'm already on.
No, you're on. Thank you.
I'll go really slow. So, yeah, it's I was thinking about Elon Musk and Tesla and how he had, in his Tesla, he has ludicrous mode. And I was thinking in the categories when you have a certain catastrophic risk, that should not be very high. That should be ludicrous, as a risk. So yeah, it was really interesting because it is definitely the first time I read through the full risk assessment, kind of item by item, and that was great. You added in the appendix because when we look at watershed protection and conservation, I think even myself, I'm guilty of a lot of assumptions, and looking at those risks was really drilling down in relation to our water system anyways, what we need to be concerned about. And obviously, you also had that slide from the province that was prioritizing wildfires and water shortage under key climate risks. But I guess the water shortage, we're not, it's not considered that high on our risk matrix because we're drawing a little bit from the lake compared to the rest of the usage. Another story, then I'll get to my question. Our FCM CEO was on a call this week with a bunch of municipalities and some people in Ukraine looking at cities and the rest of it. And part of the discussion was like, catastrophic targeting of core services, right, in that war. And I guess the only thing, I don't think we're close to war here, but, I guess the earthquake risk was definitely a concern. But can you comment, I guess one big change we've done is we don't rely on the BC hydro infrastructure at all anymore. I mean, we've created our own pipes. So I'm just wondering if that was assessed in the risk matrix in regards to that vulnerability, I guess.
Yeah, I think the short answer is not directly. I think the focus is on risks that we can action and mitigate. So I think the shift to the lake has significantly decreased the risk to our water supply. Whether it be from extreme drought or an earthquake, dam failure, having our extraction point, well below the sill of the dam should be a massive comfort to us. So yeah, it's not reflected in the watershed protection plan because it's, but maybe arguably it could be. I'll definitely give that some thought. But yes, absolutely major improvement from our risk profile to have. I mean, so I wouldn't characterize it necessarily that we're not reliant on BC Hydro infrastructures. I think there's still a strong argument that we benefit strongly from the presence of that dam in terms of, without it there, the water down the pumpage would dry up fairly quickly. And yes, we'd still be pulling out of the river, but the rest of the ecosystems would be suffering quite a bit. So I think it allows us to draw in proportion to the rest of the users of the water system. But yes, from a criticality perspective, a big improvement to our risk profile. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll move over to Director McCollum.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I had two questions about two of the risk scores on the chart. One was related to boat traffic. This is the first time I've seen the risk assessment as well, and I was surprised to see how low the risk for our boat traffic is rated in our assessment. And just given how much more boat traffic has occurred on the lake in the last couple of years and the expanded use of the Eastern boat launch, I wonder if that was taken into account in our updated assessment, or if there's other factors that kept the assessment roughly the same over the period.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't have a strong answer for you today. Clearly, boat traffic on the lake is a risk. As to why it wasn't affected by the addition of treatment, I think what ended up happening is that like as you've highlighted, we've seen an increase in boat traffic. and without these mitigation measures, that may have resulted in an increase in risk to the watershed. But on the other side, as we've seen with these ones that have made it onto the list of affected risks, we've seen a mitigation from the addition of treatment and the location of our intake. So they've kind of come out as a wash at this point. That not to say that we're not concerned about the increase of boat traffic on the lake. And it's something that we're working closely with our partners or counterparts at the Cumberland side to understand, or to influence the potential upgrades at the Cumberland Lake Park in a way that that at least won't further increase the boat traffic on the lake. And there's also been a lot of work done by our own planning staff through the updating of the rural OCP, to further kind of make it, to reduce the chance that that other boat infrastructure will be added on the lake and further exacerbating that issue.
That's good to hear. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, I mean, something that I certainly thought about this summer, well, just seeing how busy the lake is just the increasing likelihood of a boat collision that could, lead to a fuel spillage or debris in the water, and that type of pollution. So I'm glad that that's being considered. And then the other one I had a question about was silviculture and monitoring is considered a low risk. And I just wonder if you could provide some additional information on whether or not we do any assessment on how silviculture practices can increase the risk of fire. Because I know that it's common for certain herbicides to be used to limit species diversity, which in the last couple of wildfire seasons, we've heard a lot of discussion around how the kind of monoculture that's practiced can really increase the intensity of fires. And I'm just wondering if we calculate that when we are looking at silviculture, or if that's just considered in the wildfire risk category.
So by silviculture, you mean forestry activity in general? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, from a wildfire perspective, forestry is a double-edged sword. You're right. Some of the impacts that you mentioned in terms of single species, very dense regrowth are exacerbating factors. On the other hand, the presence of the road network within that watershed, the monitoring of fires and the response, so the taken by the private managed forest companies is a pretty massive mitigation measure in and of itself. So the alternative I won't weigh in terms of the relative benefits of the Crown land wildfire mitigation measures versus private, but I think it's safe to say that that the private firms take the threat of wildfire to their assets very seriously. So I think we benefit as a water service in that regard from the forestry activity in the watershed. Again, both from the network of roads, but also the intense fire monitoring, the ability of those stakeholders to close the roads as they do during the periods of high fire risk in the summer. So I think our sense, from having gone through 2 of these reviews, is that there's a net benefit from the forestry activity from a wildfire perspective in the watershed. That being said, there's over the last year in particular, there's been a lot of kind of understanding of the risks inherent to that build up of fuels. I think we're kind of early days in kind of assessing how much of an issue that is for us within the watershed.
That's really interesting. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to Director Hillian.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering if staff can clarify the status of the Watershed Advisory Group. It feels like it's a long time since I've seen an invitation or notification of a meeting.
Yeah, so we did meet a couple times in the fall to undertake the review of the risk assessment. So those were necessarily done virtually. We were still in the pandemic, but I think we are planning another meeting in April to close the loop on the risk assessment and touch on a couple of other issues that came up during our last meeting. So stay tuned.
And I'm just wondering if elected folk are still invited to those meetings or notified, or has there been some change in that regard?
Well, the chair is on for sure on the distribution list. I know the chair has attended or participated in the last couple of meetings. I'd have to check the distribution list just to see if I can't recollect if the entire committee is on there or if it's just the chair and the vice chair.
Yeah, maybe I'm not entirely up on the process. Maybe the meetings we were invited to were especially for that purpose, but it seems that we used to get notification fairly regularly, and I don't recall being notified. I mean, I'm sure the work that's going on is good, but I just found them very interesting to attend when the opportunity was available.
Yeah, just in response to that, I've been attending those, and I know that it did seem more open in the past, so maybe that was for a specific reason. But I did bring up to Chris when this item came on the agenda that it is nice to have the benefit of this, kind of seeing this process unfold. So, and I think Chris had thought about having I'm sorry, the name of the Corey to come and do a more kind of detailed report, but they weren't able to today. So maybe that's something that we can look at for future.
For sure.
Just to give a little bit more information. Are you able to check in, Chris, to find out if other elected folks could sit in on those meetings if they wanted to?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I will definitely follow up on that. And we'll definitely action a more fulsome overview of the plan, an update on the plan and the risk assessment from Corey at a subsequent meeting. Sounds like that would be appreciated. As far as I think it's coming back to me now regarding the Watershed Advisory Group and the Water Committee. I think the intent, kind of the desire was to keep a fairly good balance of attendees. So not necessarily put the invite out to the entire Water Committee. If that being said, if there's a desire by the Water Committee to have an invite go out to everybody, we could definitely assess.
Or maybe it's a matter of having more regular kind of check-ins or overviews. I'm not sure, but but I know when this item came up, I did think, there was a lot of discussion and conversation over this process for several meetings, and the rest of the committee doesn't get the benefit of how those, the rationale was made. Okay, so we have Director Cole Hamilton.
Great, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chris. And I would just echo Director Hillian's comments. If it is appropriate, I'd certainly appreciate having the opportunity to attend on occasion. So thanks for considering that.
Okay.
I wanted to just ask a couple of questions about risk number 30, commercial, industrial, or residential development. I noted it says that it sort of wasn't previously considered. I'm assuming that as a general factor, it was considered in the design and development of the water treatment plant, and assuming that it was, do we have a sense of how much the design put into that plant will work to temper that risk? I realize we obviously don't have any figures on it yet, but what your sense is at this point.
So if I understand correctly, you're asking whether the potential impacts from development can be handled by the water treatment plant, is that?
Yeah, well, as with the other risks, the water treatment plant and the design of it has often helped to ameliorate some of the risk. And I was curious as to whether, although there's no risk listed from item 30, whether that was a factor in the design of the plant. And do you have a sense of how successfully it's sort of working to abate that risk?
Well, I think, as you can see from this list, which is incomplete, it's just focused on the ones that have seen a change. I think arguably we've got risks on there that are lower in consequence than potentially heavy industrial development within the catchment area of the watershed is, and yet they're not fully abated by the presence of the water treatment plant, even though And it's because, there is, although we've built a fully redundant, sophisticated treatment plant, there is always the risk that something gets through. If there's an equipment failure at the same time as a risk is materializing in the watershed. So, as you can see, none of these risks have been fully mitigated by the addition of the treatment plant. They've been improved. So you'd expect something similar for development. But like I say, the potential consequence is arguably higher given the scale. So you would expect it to have been mitigated by the addition of the plant, but not fully mitigated in line with the other.
Okay, so there's been some amelioration of the risk, and I guess we'll
Yes.
find out more as it's assessed in this round. Okay, thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Director Arbor.
Yeah, I remember, I think this came up at this committee before, and it's definitely come up in the village of Cumberland around their work. And I think they have set a pretty big buffer zone in their plans. But whether this will end up a low risk or moderate, I guess you're correct. It's appropriate to put it there, but the landfill risk is also in there, not on this chart. But there's also recommendations around us maybe putting some water monitoring station between the landfill and the lake or something like that.
There's already extensive monitoring in place, which has confirmed that the landfill itself is the groundwater is migrating away from the lake towards the Morrison Creek headwaters. So that's firmly established. We do have a piece of work just initiated and actually nearing completion in order to help support our discussions with the village of Cumberland, which will kind of better assess, which way the groundwater is flowing for the rest of that Bevanlands area, because just looking at the lay of the land doesn't tell the full story in that area because it's so permeable. And there is some flow of lake water that's moving from the lake towards Morrison Creek. So that piece is underway. So we should have a better clarity on.
Yeah, so we might be able to synergize all those things in the risk mitigation. And I would say, I would put an and rather than an or, because I think it's commercial, industrial, and I think all the components are likely to be in play rather than or. My last comment, going back to your forestry piece. Of course, there's benefits to having people in the forest and to doing wildfire management. But by the same extent, that doesn't mean that we need to be satisfied with the entirety of the forest management. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure that Metro Vancouver would be logging the Capilano watershed if it was a net benefit to the water system, which they control. So I think we don't want to stretch too much by saying that. What I would say is forest management is likely very desirable on that scale of watershed, but the scale of the forest management also matters. Mm-hmm. So I think you could still have a lot of those benefits with a different forestry regime. Thanks.
Great, thank you. We've had some pretty good discussion. Are there any other comments before I just make a couple of my own? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to go back to Director McCollum's point about the boat traffic. I think it might be good to just get a bit more information about that, because I guess when I see the assessment as low, and in the case if there was a collision and there was a big fuel spill, I mean, it would be nice to get a little bit more information about that. I don't have a recollection of that specific item, the conversation. So that might be just something to get a little bit more information on how that was assessed. And also interestingly, the items where the risk has decreased were mostly around human control, which we often don't think that we have a lot of control over humans, but the places around the trails and obviously some of it was from the water treatment plant as well, but those climate change items were the ones that we're struggling with. And again, we have obviously our underlying goals around climate change, but it would be good to have a little bit more detail of how we're specifically looking at some of these risks to the the watershed that are definitely more out of our control, like climate change. So on that, I guess we'll vote on, is anyone opposed to receipt? And then we have a recommendation after that. Okay, anyone wants to move that recommendation? Okay, we'll Hamilton and Hamir. And is there any discussion on the recommendation? Seeing none, that's carried. And we're moving into recommendation to go in camera. Arbor and Grant, anyone opposed to going camera? Seeing none, we'll move in camera. Thank you.